Thank you very much. I'm just going to load my slides quickly. Hopefully they won't take too long. Shouldn't do. I think actually we're triplets rather than just twins, because I've certainly been very passionate about writing, reading, and like Alys, certainly for many, many years. I think even as a child, sadly, I've lost both my parents now, but I'm just waiting for the screen to come up and catch up with me. Lovely. And I certainly wrote vividly as a child. I was a pain. I always used to do my homework on literature and language, and to the detriment of maths and anything else I didn't particularly like. But anyway, I got there. So this was slightly different for me as well. And it's nice to share some of the other projects I do because many of you may know me with my water birth hat on, but I do have lots of other hats, including being a businesswoman. I do run my own business, which was a big, big learning curve for me. But embedded with all of this is my passion for midwifery, the families, my colleagues that I work with. And this particular aspect of what I call my summertime reading, really came about. And I know Sue said, we have moved away and on from COVID, but this actually was embedded during COVID, where I couldn't get out and about. And I was doing a lot of Zoom teaching, which again, I'm passionate about, but it's not the same, as we all know, as face to face. And I was approached by an American journal, which is Midwifery Today, looking for someone to do book reviews. And I thought, oh, yeah, double passion, writing, yeah, and book reviews in my garden. Because if you remember the summer of 2020, it was lovely weather. And this is just a tiny smidgen of some that I've done in the last since the beginning of the year, actually. This one, which you can see at the top, is called Help, I'm Going to Be a Dad. That's another of my hats. I'm a trustee for APEC, Action on Preeclampsia. So that, as you can see, is ready to write up the review. But because of the business hat, I do get other books as well. So this is my latest from Friday. Hopefully you can see it says Eat That Frog. So if you wait for the review, you'll know why it's called Eat That Frog. So that one's to come. So these, as I say, are just a smidgen, and I get a huge number, which is fantastic, that gets sent to me. The interest for me has always been, there's embedded in that somewhere is that midwifery aspect. So some of the books I'm going to share with you this evening might seem a little strange, and you think, well, how do they fit into midwifery? But the three that I've picked to talk about the most, and I have to say, out of 42 book reviews that I've done since summer 2020, all have a very different aspect. So you might be surprised what I've picked. It's my choice, obviously. I did send them to Sue and she said, yep, that's fine. But they've all got a very, very, very different angle to them. So this is an interesting one. As you can see, it's called Belly Women. And if you read the book, you'll see why. What I will do in 2 out of the 3 books is say it's a very sensitive book. This is one that you have to have the right mindset. You have to be in a good place yourself before you can read this, because it is very moving. There are some very traumatic deliveries in here. And I think I just put that in as a warning for people. And I'll tell you what I do with books once I finish with them. So this is about the Ebola pandemic. So it's not about COVID, but it's obviously about a huge pandemic that was hitting particular parts of Africa. I heard Benjamin talk on a podcast, and I was just totally inspired by what this guy had done, along with other colleagues. He wasn't working on his own. Obstetrician gynecologist, as you can see, working for international agencies. But the way he spoke about what was going on with the Ebola just sent waves through me about some of the similarities with what we had been going through, and at that point was still doing when he wrote the book. You can see the date, 2022. And sadly, what was happening with Ebola was what we were hearing, seeing, hitting the press every well, every 5 minutes. Things like the conspiracy theories. Now, you have to remember this is mainly based in parts of Africa, particularly Sierra Leone. Lack of PPE, those of us who worked clinically, which many of us did, including me, through COVID, poor governmental support. Really found this very, very challenging to read. And I have to say, of all the books I've ever reviewed, this one took me the longest to read. And I think Alys said about sometimes just giving yourself that space to think, it's okay, I can step back from this for a little while, I can come back to it. And I probably did that about half a dozen times with this book. They're always on my bedside cabinet, and I just, when I'm ready, I'll go back to it. What was really sad and made me really decide, yes, this is one I definitely not only want to review but share with you tonight, was Benjamin's phrase in the book. About halfway through, he said that they felt, this is the workers, as well as obviously the families that they were working with, felt abandoned by the world. And he carried on to say, had this been happening in a developed country or developed countries, and obviously what happened eventually, sadly, with COVID, they wouldn't have felt abandoned. They wouldn't have felt lost. Now, some of us may feel that anyway about COVID, but when you read it from a very different angle, I think it really made me sit back. So just that word of warning, it's not one, yes, it is, as I put, summertime reading, but you just have to be in the right place, I believe, before you might want to think about this one. But as I said, I will share with you what I do once the books are finished. A very different angle. This is from a colleague, Amanda Burley, who many of you may know, and I certainly do. I don't always get books sent to me. Sometimes people will actually ask me, and Amanda did with this book, as did Becky Reid with Closure, which is another book that I did a review on. So I do get books from lots of different colleagues. If I ever felt it was a book that I couldn't feel would do it justice, I would just email the author back and just say, this is not a book I feel I can do justice on a review. That's rare. I think it's only happened twice since I started. This in itself, at the beginning of Amanda's book, because it's about bullying and midwifery, which I know we've done sessions on these hours, there is a trigger warning from Amanda and her colleagues on the front cover before you even start the book. So I think authors are very sensitive to those who may be reading the book. And I think that's a good sign for me of an author anyway. There are lots of stories in it. They are very moving. I've just done, 4 or 5 bullet points here, but, stories about why midwives leave the NHS. And sadly, those who move into other, often non-midwifery roles, although, as Alys said, we have lots of different roles in midwifery, but we also have great skills, knowledge, experience, exposure to be able to take out of midwifery. So please don't undervalue what you're doing, what you've had. But if this is not the right time and place for you, please don't undervalue those skills and take them elsewhere. And of course, many midwives in different ways have gone into private practice. And, credit to them that that's the chosen avenue, possibly for short or maybe long term. Certainly, sadly, and I certainly have been very aware of these reports, the Kirkup reports in 2015 and 2022, talking about the poor culture. And having only recently retired from NHS after over 40 years, sadly, that is still out there. And it's about, why do we feel that we do this to each other? Why is there this bullying attitude? And the students have written their stories as well about how they're bullying. And it's very subtle bullying they write. Sadly, sometimes about being excluded. So when you read the stories, it's simple things sometimes that might seem simple when we're reading them, but simple things like being excluded from meetings, coffee rooms. I mean, it's quite amazing. And that subtle bullying, in some ways, may be harder for some people to take on board than very obvious bullying, because it's verbalized, it's seen, it can be felt. So yeah, it's a very moving book. However, on the positive, because it is so important, what I did after I read this book was, where do I go and get assistance if this was me going through it? And I will tell you, I was bullied in one of my jobs. And for someone who's big and tough and 42 years, as a midwife, it was very subtle. Was I naive? Yeah, probably was a bit, actually. I didn't think everyone was going to be a lifelong friend and that everyone was going to love me, but it was very subtle bullying. So I had to think back to what I did when that was happening, and I left that job. And the RCM were certainly my port of call to start with, but there are so many other ports of call now. So I've already mentioned our own forums here, and that's another role that I'm very privileged to belong to. I'm on their advisory group. If you've never encountered them, have a look at TED Talks, because they look at other disciplines who are bullied, and it is pretty universal, I'm afraid to tell us. But I've used TED Talks for a lot of things, but I've also used it after reading Amanda's book, and it is pretty universal. But I think sometimes when you look outside your own profession, it doesn't always make you feel better, but it just makes you realise that it is sadly pretty universal. So sometimes that's not always a bad way of looking at things. And then this final book, because I thought, let's have something really unusual. And this is from America. I didn't physically get the book, which was a bit sad, but I certainly got it online and read it through and then did the review. So it's called My Extraordinary Face. And as you can see, I've just pulled out some of the quotes that I used in the review, but it explores how children have a special trick. You can see from the pictures, these are children who have some changes, a facial difference, as they call it at the end. I love this one. They gather up love, care and kindness and make it a protective bubble. And I, sadly, over my career, have certainly delivered babies with some facial difference. Certainly, I've delivered babies with hair lip. So, yeah, it resonated. It's what Alys said about the stories. I love this as well. The book stresses to the children, this is very much aimed at the children, that they are confident, they're special, they're one of a kind, and their smiles lighten up the world. And then finally, because it is very, very easy to read, for parents, it's also aimed at, of course, us as health professionals, but this is aimed at children. And as I say, their description is of those who have a facial difference. And I think sometimes just the words, trying to think, if you've got a parent, who wasn't expecting, a baby with a hair lip or any other facial, to be able to use that word, I thought was very powerful. So looking outside, as I said, pure midwifery sometimes really enhances what I do. So again, contact details, but I don't just sit with these books all behind me here. These, as I say, are reviews that I've been doing for Midwifery Today in the USA since 2020. They're not protected, so if anybody is interested in any of them, they're very short. You're very welcome to email me and say, oh, I see you did this review, are you willing to share it? But once the books, because I don't just want them sitting on my shelf, I want these to get out there. I donate them to my local NHS medical library. So they're out there for anyone and everyone, people who have read them. There's lots of intra-library loans, and I know some of the books have gone out. And I have to thank the librarians at my medical library, because now I've left the NHS, you sometimes feel you're a bit left behind. And I don't have much access to medical libraries except through the one I've just retired from. So I do thank them. It's a big thank you, because they're fab at getting books and articles that I would struggle to do perhaps on my own. So I don't know, I think Sue said at the beginning, but this all goes into my portfolio for my revalidation, because again, you have to look at other avenues, particularly if you work outside mainstream clinical. But, you know, my gurus of that have been people like Alys, and you think, well, how do they do their portfolio? You know, like many of us, yes, we did work clinical, but I don't work clinical now, certainly not in the UK. So, you know, this goes into my portfolio with my evidence, and I'm due for revalidation next year. I have no worries, no problems that I will be revalidated, because all of my work goes into that. So it's just a smidgen of some of those books that I've reviewed. Sue very kindly mentioned that, yes, I am rewriting my book. It's going to be a whole new book. There will be some things that are similar, because not everything has changed in the water birth world. But the one big chapter that will be drastically changed is the research. The amount of international research that is now coming out about water birth has absolutely, sorry, I'm just about to turn that off. Nobody should ring me on the house phone. And it's absolutely phenomenal. So my nagging, Alys says about, you know, have trust in yourself and don't feel like you've got the imposter syndrome. Something I talk a lot about when I travel internationally, because up until a few years ago, lots of countries weren't publishing. They kept saying, well, you know, we've only done 50 water births, or we've only done 100 water births. And I remind them that the first article was Michel Audin in 1983 about his first 100 water births. So it doesn't matter whether you've done 25, 2, 1. Write the stories. Get them published. And I do refer to Practicing Midwife a lot, because I know they have a wonderful team to help. But don't undervalue those experiences. So that, for me, will be the biggest challenge. My plan is to get it out next year, but I'm not even putting a month on it yet. I'm going to wait and see what else comes up. So I thank you for your time. I hope you found it useful. And please do contact me, because I've got, as I say, 42, soon to be 43, and after that 44 book reviews. And you're very welcome to have a look. And I do put the cost on, because I know money is often an issue for a lot of us. But all of those, apart from that one from America, will be in our library. And of course, remember, libraries do borrow from each other. So thank you very much for your time.
Fabulous, Dianne. Thank you so much.